So it's a great honor to be the first speaker on Angular TinyCon 2023. I know Adi before last year. Oh, sorry, I think my screen was not on. Okay, so let's get back again. So I know Adi on 2022 when I was overseeing and I couldn't participate in the 2022 version. So very glad to be here again today. And greeting from Vietnam. I'm based in Singapore, but at the moment, I came back to Vietnam for a couple of weeks. And today we talk about the ngTemplateOutlet, which you might not reuse it in your template or in your project. So without further ado, let's get started. Again, my name is Trung. My name is Trung from Vietnam. As I mentioned, I do the two group, Anglo Vietnam and Anglo Singapore. So we organize meetup, we prepare documentation for the community member, and we also create an opportunity for them to speak as well, as you can see. So very happy to also see one of our community member from Anglo Vietnam today in Anglo TinyConf. Once again, thank Ali for the great opportunity so that we can also participate in this international event. I do some open source project online, and there's a Spotify. That's my most notable project, and I also have a Jira clone, which is one of the first project that I published, and it's got quite attention. So thanks for all of your support once more time. You can always view the code in GitHub. You can see here, that's my GitHub, and all of the project is open source. So I at the moment was working for Ascenda, and we made loyalty simple for bank and global finance institution around the world. So the agenda today, we revisit ngTemplate, and then we look into ngTemplateOutlet, and then we see the use case that make the ngTemplate so powerful. Then let's get started with some simple example. And just as a side note, because I have two screens and it's not exactly at home and I don't have the webcam, so in most of the cases, I will look into the other monitor. So sorry for that. I will not look directly into the screen that you are seeing. So in this example, the first one, come back to the presentation. I have the first P tag that say hello, and I have the second one, which is wrapped inside an ngTemplate. And I have the third one, like the P tag with the tiny cons tag. And when we see it in the UI or in the DOM, we only see the first one, which is a hello, and the last one, tiny con. We don't see the second one, the one that is wrapped inside ngTemplate. And you only see a comment on the DOM, like container. I don't know how this render, but there's certain mark on the DOM tree so that Angular understand. But the important is like you don't see it. That's the important. So go to the definition of Angular template is like that is the Angular element, and to define a template. And when we define using ngTemplate, the template is not rendered by default. So keep it in mind. Then we go to the next interesting example. So we usually see this kind of ngTemplate in a structural directive. For example, the most common one is ngIf. So we have a Boolean, and if it's true, we render the first one. And if it's false, then we render this loading template. I define it with the name loading template, like a template variable. And then I can use it in the ngIf. So that is the most common that you see. That's what I expect, but maybe you see it somewhere else. So if the thing is true or false, and it's rendered based on the condition that we pass it in, and here you see now you see me certain stuff below it's just some reflecting comment from Angular itself, not that very important. So when we apply a structural directive like with the star in front of the ngIf, because when we look into ngIf source code, it is defining just using the usual directive decorator that we have, and we have ngIf. But when we use it, we usually put this asterisk in front of it, and Angular is gonna transform the asterisk in front of the structure directive into a ngTemplate. That is happening behind the scene. So look into the just now the previous example, and we see that the P with the asterisk ngIf now becoming something like actually it's just a P with the text inside, and then we wrap the whole thing with ngTemplate outside, and then we can passing the value as the input. So the loading template here we can just give it into ngIf else. So that is more like the explicit version. So like that Kerala is something we use in Singapore, right? We say, oh, is it possible? That's how you do it in the way you speak English in the US, I guess. But in Singapore, we say like that Kerala, which means is it even possible? So look into our example. The first one, we have hello, we have bua, and we have p with tiny con. But then now we remove the ng template outside of the second one. So it's becoming the p with asterisk only. And as you can guess, right, when we apply the asterisk into any kind of element, then this element will be transformed. Like just, as you are wrapping the ng template surrounding it. And for sure, this example doesn't sound very useful at all. But it's like the element that has the asterisk will be hidden from it all. So you don't really usually see it. Yeah, it's kind of I found it recently when I talked to Joe. So yeah, you can see it work at the same like the first example. And then actually now in this use case when you can just apply the asterisk and it's becoming an ng template, this might be a use case where it is helpful. In this use case, you might not really understand the code because the parent is trying to use content child and query a template reference. And usually we need to give a ng template surrounding our content. And then inside the parent, we can query it. But now with this trick, it's suddenly becoming something like child with a star. It's shorter, but I don't know. It depends on your test and depend on your project. You might wonder to whether apply it or not. But it's a fun fact. So it's not that common that you see it online. So now we talk about ng template that define a template, and it didn't get rendered by default. So how do we render the template explicitly if we want to? Then we have the ngTemplateOutlet directive, and the code is pretty simple. But I was, I tried to show it on slide before, but I don't have time, so I'll just go into how we can use ngTemplateOutlet. So here I again define a template, and I call it confidential. And then I wanted to render it somewhere, so I just put a div, and then ngTemplateOutlet here is just like work as an like an input, like you define a directive and you give it the input with the same name, and you can do the same thing. So you can say, okay, ngTemplateOutlet with confidential, and it's gonna be rendered into the DOM. And here the interesting is like the div and the p coming from the template is in the same level. So it is not like what might be more intuitive is that you might think the p should be a children of the div, but it's just a sibling. This is rendered next to the div itself. So some use case, like in some use case, you don't want to have this div. So what do? We have ng container, which is just another tag coming from Angular, and then you do the same thing, ngTemplateOutlet. And then when it's rendered, you just render the P. So that's usually what we want. We don't really want the unnecessary div tag surrounding next to it. And something new that I discovered recently when I read the Angular material source code, you can actually use ngTemplateOutlet with another ngTemplate. That is so cool. I don't know. I never seen this code if I don't read the Angular material source code. And it will work the same. It's gonna render the template that you define into the DOM when you apply the ngTemplateOutlet to an ngTemplate, right? So it's not ng container, it's ngTemplate. So you define it using ngTemplate and you render it using ngTemplate. But all of that is like, coming to the definition that ngTemplateOutlet is basically a directive in Angular that allow you to render a template dynamically. So typically we use it to reuse a certain template inside the same component or override a template. You see the spinning shutdown? I wanted to make it very clear that there is two use case. Most of the time we use ngTemplateOutlet. And one of the first use case is like you wanted to create a HTML block like reusable using ngTemplateOutlet, and that is a code coming from material. So you define a radio as the first, the top one. I hope it's clear enough. That's a radio template, and then based on certain condition, we might wanted to apply a different classes, and maybe different if. I mean, depend on different if, then we render different stuff or parent. So that's why we say, okay, instead of taking the whole div and then you copy it over, you just say define template and then we can reuse it. And when you need to change anything, you just change in one place. That is one of the use case, right? You don't really see it that often in the code that we do, really. There use case for it, but usually the template is existing inside the same component, and there might be something that's going to be repeatable, and then it is not worth to extract it into a component by its own, so we use ngTemplate. So that's the first use case. And you can, I will share the slide later, but basically you can click into the link and see the source code, the original one. And the next one is like, if we can just define a template and then we render it, that doesn't seem that useful. In 90% of the cases, you will come back to this, this use case where we can create a reusable template and that's it. But the real powerful of ngTemplateOutlet is like you can say, or actually, ngTemplate and ngTemplateOutlet is like you can give it a certain context. It's like a certain piece of data that you can send to a template, and it can use this data and render. So for example, I define a template called fra, and then I have the less is the Angular syntax. That's important. And then you do hyphen, and then something. This something here is like str. We can use it inside the ngTemplate, within ngTemplate block, right? It will exist inside this ngTemplate block. It will not exist outside. So if you do something str outside, it will not understand. That's first. And when we use it, you can pass an additional object called context. And because we have the right side called name, so the object key of the context has to be named. The left side can be anything, but the right side has to be named. This name and this name has to be named. But the outside, str here can be anything, can be first name, last name, whatever, person, you name it. And we also have one use case where we just has a less with a name, like it's just a something else, first name, last name, whatever. And then you don't give it the equal and then the right side of the equal side. So when you use it, again, you can still use the name here inside all of the template, ngTemplate, inside within the same ngTemplate. But when we use it, when we pass the data, you need to say it's implicit, right? Because we don't really give it a name, so it needs to be something special that Angular understand, and this is implicit. So hope you get a certain idea, but basically you can define a template context so that the context now has a certain data that it can use, and we can pass different data into a same context, and it's going to render differently. That's important to understand the next point. So now we look into the power of ngTemplate. Finally, after like 10 minutes, half of the talk, now we look into the real use case of ngTemplate where it's like useful. So let's say I create a table and I just call it movie. As you can see, very simple. I have a header and I have a for. So I actually already has the source code and it's running. Okay, I think you can see it in the UI. So I have the table called movie and I have a table called product. It's very simple. It's just it's just a list of something, and then you give it to the component, and then I do some for, and then go to the list, go through an array, and then for each, I render star that I want. But that's the first initial phase when we create a table. Usually, we wanted to give it some style, right? It's look a bit like nicer. It's look nicer. And then movie, same. So we give it a style, and then it's look a bit nicer. And then usually the table will not just stop here. There's a lot more to come. Yeah, the common functionality of the table, of the share table, is usually like, I don't know, it could be, when the array doesn't have any children or any element you wanted to render differently. And when it's loading, you wanted to render a spinner. So all of that, you want the table look the same. So that's why suddenly we wanted to say kind of, maybe we should creating a generic table component. And actually the demo I'll just show you. Right, so there's certain functionality that usually the table need to support, like maybe there's a drag and drop and everything. There's a lot more. I just couldn't think of, but in my project before, when I create the table, there's a lot more use case. So now we say, let's define a generic table component, and then we let the table handle everything. So the table is gonna accepting an additional array of the column definition that we wanted to render. So it's gonna look like that. Maybe let me open the source code here. It's gonna be easier. So let's say I go into my the first generic table component, and then the style is the same anyway. But here I accept a data array that have the shape of any, because it could be anything. It could be a person. It could be a product. It could be a movie. And I want it to be very generic. And then I have a column definition that come with very simple for now, just the field and the header. So the field and header is because I want to render the header differently than the property coming from the object itself. And when you look into product, for example, right, I render it as product ID, and then the field, the property is just ID. Same for name, same for form, price, and it could be really flexible, right? So that's why I create this generic table component, simple, and it's work. Like if I use it in the code, so I go to the main TS, and then let's say, let me zoom it a bit smaller. So I have a product table, and then I have movie. So I already prepared the code, so it's gonna be app generic table with movie, and then I have movie and column, and it just render the same thing, same for product. So I will not just show you, but it's gonna render the same, exactly the same. So movie ID, and I go down, I have movie ID and title, and the same, like rating and year. The tricky part is like, let's say I wanted to replace this rating here with something else, with maybe a star component, for example, just an example. So let me go into the movie table, and now instead of just take the text, the value and render it as easy, I have app star rating, and then this app star rating is like render the star based on the value. In the some is like 3 stars, some is like 2 stars, some 5 stars, and the movie rating is like in the scale of 10. That's why I need to divide it by 2, so that is matched to the 5-star component that I have. So now, if we wanted to support it into the generic component, then it's becoming more interesting. It's a bit interesting to work on. So if I wanted to say, now let's support this kind of star rating component in my super generic, ng4 and stuff. Now I need to introduce a type, and then for different type, let's say I just switch through the type, and then the type could be rating, text, date, number, something else, boolean, whatever. There's so many possibilities that we can think of. And then this block of code, the ng4 suddenly becoming really big, and the component, there might be an interaction, like you press, you need to emit some output. There's just a lot more functionality and flexibility that we need to support. And it might not be that simple, right? So what I try to make is like, if we encapsulate all of the functionality to the parent generic table to render this row, it's gonna be becoming too much for the component, and we might end up, in having a massive table component. And the solution is like, when we think about ngTemplate, maybe there is a way for us to say, I still want a certain functionality, the certain common functionality. Like, when the table doesn't have any value, then I render the no value template. When it's loading, I render a spinner. But the part where, to render the row, maybe there's certain way that when I use this generic table component, the place where I wanted to use it, then I can specify the row template. And that exactly that we can do with ngTemplateOutlet, where basically, oh sorry, I was just spoiling the thing. But basically, if we look into the really more generic table with ngTemplateOutlet, now we, instead of passing a column definition, we start to pass in the two template reference, and then we call it header and row. And the very important part here is like, when I go to the loop of the data, I need to, I wanted to say, okay, for each item in an array, render this template that's coming from outside. And then I'm gonna give you the data so that you can use, which means that, the template that I give it outside, it might look like something in the main TS. So I will show you quickly how it's gonna look. So app generic table, and then with the outlet. And then now what I can do is I can specify I move it up easier. So now I can say, with the new table with the outlet, I have a header. The header can be anything you decide when you use it. And then I have the template, I call it row. The row here, and the header is for us to query from our component. And I have the last row equal to row. So when the array has to go through the loop, and then I say render this template, I also give it the data, the object that I wanted to use here. So for movie, I can, suddenly the row here is going to be equal to one movie object. Same for product, same for employee, same for person, same for any other object. And then I can start to decide, to render my stuff here, instead of giving all of this into our generic table component. And it is really cool. So I just say app star rating again. I hope it's work. Now it's not a movie, it's just a row. And because I don't import it into my main, so basically I need to do, okay, now I actually use it, so I need to import my star rating component. And then I save it. And then I guess it's somewhere below, on top. I think it's here. That's the one. So the version that we had do exactly the same that we wanted to, with a very like concrete table component. But by utilizing the template outlet and ngTemplate, we say, when you use it, then you give me the template, and then I will, give you the data that you need so that you can decide whatever you want. So here, suddenly, if you wanted to support, certain click event, it sounds very natural. If we need to support, the event, output handler inside our generic component, it is super tricky. It's like you need to, I don't know. I do about it. I did the example, but I don't have time to show and prepare it in the stack list. So very sorry, but I hope you get the idea of the ngTemplateOutlet now, where you can just say, you give me the template and then I do it for you. And to recap, ngTemplate define a template that is not rendered. And then ngTemplate is a way for you to utilize this, to render the template when you wanted to do it, when you want it, with the context, the last one. So yeah, I think that's it. Sorry, it take a bit longer than expected because this is go through all of the example for you. But I hope you learned something, and that is the slide. You can see that's my
Yes.
real